This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Valeria interviews Karen Treiger. After 18 years of practicing law in Seattle, Karen Treiger felt an unmistakable call to explore the story of her in-laws, Sam and Esther Goldberg. Educated at Barnard College and New York University Law School, where she was editor-in-chief of NYU Law Review, Treiger made the momentous decision to retire from her law practice and pull together the threads of a family story she had heard for many years. The result of her 3-year inquiry is the widely praised book, My Soul is Filled with Joy, a Holocaust Story. In it, Treiger chronicles both Sam and Esther Goldberg's journey, including Sam's escape from the death camp Treblinka, as well as her family's experiences in Poland, when they retraced the path from Treblinka to the pit in the Polish forest where they hid until their liberation. As Treiger became invigorated and inspired by the people she encountered, Sam and Esther's story became her story too. Since the book's publication, Treiger has crisscrossed the country to bring this compelling story to a wide audience. In June 2019, she traveled to Poland to launch the Polish translation of the book and speak in Warsaw and at the Krakow Jewish Festival. She has been named to the Jewish Book Council Authors Network and the Seattle Holocaust Center for Humanity Speakers Bureau. Her perspectives have been shared in the Forward and the Jewish Press. She is ready to speak to audiences around the world, in person or via video hookup. Meet Karen at KarenTreiger.com. Here is the interview with Karen Treiger.
In your own words, who is Karen Treiger?
Karen Treiger is a woman who lives in Seattle, Washington, who works very hard to make the world a place that she wants to live in and tries to help others to make that same kind of world.
So before we talk about some of the topics in your book or about your book itself, My Soul is Filled with Joy, a Holocaust Story, I have a few warm-up questions, as I mentioned off record. So the first one for you had to be this one. What does it mean to be a human being?
That is a question that I have thought about a lot in the course of my research and writing of this book. And it's a very complicated question because what it means to me to be a human being is to be a very complicated entity that's on this planet trying to survive. And that one of the conclusions I came to after digging deep into, which I'm sure we'll get into more, but digging deep into the evils of World War II and the Holocaust, was that every human being has within ourselves the possibilities for being the kindest, most open-hearted person. But at the same time, we have just as equally, the opportunity and within us as humans to be the most evil and to be the most, what I consider to be the most horrific, take the most horrific actions against other humans or against other creatures that also live on the planet. And so because I saw so starkly both sides of the human character, I've come to the conclusion that it's a reality that we just have to live with, that we live in this space between the good and the evil. And each of us has a choice about how our humanity will be played out in the world. We can choose if we're going to be the kind, good, truthful, honest people, or if we're going to be the evil, terrible people. And it is left to us to decide which part of what it means to be human that we're going to express. So I feel that being human is to be fully alive and to find the place within you that you want to express. I hope it's the good part, but to find it and to use it in a way that brings to life your soul and your spirit.
The idea of choice, I agree 100%. We all have a choice. So we can be, let's say, good or bad, if we have to use extremes, that the opposites. Have you seen one human being being both equally bad and good, or just one or the other?
Well, I've never, in my personal experience, I've never seen someone who I think is really evil and is really good, and like seen the extremes come out in one person that I've known myself. I've read very confusing and upsetting stories about things that happened in World War II, where you had someone who did the most evil things that you can imagine. I mean, murdering babies and just the most awful things, but then turns around and does something that's kind or that's good. In fact, I know we're going to get to the book, but just to give an example that I ran across in my father-in-law's life. My father-in-law was a survivor of the death camp Treblinka. And that is a place where it was really awful. 870,000 people were murdered there. And there was this Nazi officer who's nicknamed the Lalka. His name is Kurt Franz, but he's nicknamed the Lalka because that means, in Polish, it means the doll, like the beautiful doll. And I guess he had I've seen pictures of him. He had a beautiful face. But he was like the most sadistic, awful Nazi officer in Treblinka, in my opinion. And he would go around torturing and murdering people for fun. But if it weren't for that awful Nazi officer who extended kindness to my father-in-law, Sam Goldberg, he would never have survived. And that's a crazy thing. You have one of the most evil human beings that God ever put on the planet, who for some reason took whatever little bit of humanity and kindness he had within him, and he extended it to my father-in-law and helped him survive. So go figure. Go figure. Wow. I don't know. I don't know how to put those two things into my brain at the same time, but it is true. It is definitely true that happened.
So what comes to mind for me is that it might be that they are not making that choice. They're just living without awareness and making no choice and just going, not with the flow of life, which I believe to be based on unconditional love. So I don't think that's the flow of life, but just maybe the flow of being a human without awareness, without love. It's the only thing I can think of. They didn't make that choice.
Yeah, that's a very interesting explanation of what was going on for the Lalka, let's say, as an example, or there were others that had that kind of a situation. But it's hard for me to let him off like that and say that he wasn't making a choice. He did such evil things that he was choosing to do it. And I think he was also choosing, for some reason that I don't understand, to be kind to my father-in-law, Sam. But yeah, so I agree with the premise of what you just said, but I don't want to let this guy off too easily. Do you know what I mean?
I do understand that. But that, Karen, makes me think about the idea of not thinking for ourselves and letting other people kind of lead the way. We see that all the time. People not taking responsibility for their own minds, their own way of life, their physical health, and they're just going by what other people think and do and want us to do. And it might be that too. So that I call it like being lost. So now you don't make a choice, so others will make it for you. That situation specifically really makes me think about not making a choice and letting others and other influences to lead the way for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. And I can't say that that's not the reality of what happens in these kind of cases. I don't know. I just know that those were the facts on the ground. And what was going on in terms of the neurons that were going through his brains, it's so hard to analyze that, you know?
True. And some people are born this way too. I think we have a clinical name, psychopath.
Oh, yes.
They don't feel, there's no empathy. Yeah, it's almost like being a lion, being an animal. and doing anything for survival or for pleasure. Yeah, it is disturbing. I agree. I remember when I found out about all these things, I couldn't sleep for a while because I was naive about the human nature. I have a few more warm-up questions. The next one, you use the word joy. So do you connect joy to happiness? What is joy to you, Karen?
Joy can bring happiness. I don't think they're exactly the same. That's a good question. I had never thought of that framing before in terms of the word joy. I think joy, when I use the word, in fact, I use the title of the book comes not from my mouth, so to speak, but from the mouth of one of the grandson of one of the righteous Gentiles, one of the saviors, people who helped my in-laws when they were in hiding. They wouldn't have survived without the help of these two families named the Stish. And their grandson didn't really know the whole story about what his grandparents had done during the war. And when I connected with him, it was, of course, through the internet and through someone who knows Polish and helped me find him. At the end of the conversation, he said in Polish, but my friend translated, he said, "My heart is full and my soul is filled with joy." And that was so impacted by his statement. And then like all the things that happened to me over the course of the 3 years when I was researching and writing the book brought me, even though it's a Holocaust story, so much joy in the connections that I made with people. Then that's why I decided to use that title. But so to focus on the word joy, its relationship to happiness, joy to me feels more like something that's really deep inside of you. Like you can be happy if someone gives me an ice cream cone, I'm going to be happy. Like, thank you. That's awesome.
Right.
That's not going to bring me joy. What brings me joy is something that I kind of have to dig deep for. It's something that's really inside of me that's going to come out and burst open into the world from something amazing that happens. Like having an hour-long conversation with this man in Poland who I'd never met before, and now it is part of my story and part of my life in this beautiful way. And that is joyful. It's something spiritual.
What do you think the purpose of the human experience is?
Is there an ultimate purpose to the experience of being alive? I guess I believe that there is. I don't know for certain because in the limited amount of time that we're granted to be alive, which is finite, as unfortunately we all know too well, we don't really know. You don't really know what you're here for. You can try to figure it out and do your best. But I think that each person has to determine what their purpose is and do the best they can to achieve it. It's interesting that you brought up that as a concept because I've been thinking about this topic because I've never before read the very famous book, The Alchemist. And my 21-year-old daughter said, "Mom, you haven't read this book. You should read it." And I started reading it. I haven't finished it yet. And it's so beautiful. And one of the things that I've been really sitting with, so to speak, is this concept of that he brings up in the first half of the book about a person's personal legend. And he uses that term to be the person's mission in life. And that our goal is to seek out our personal legend and therefore achieve our mission in life. And we do it by facing the good and the bad, and by facing our fears, and by confronting our dreams and saying, that's my dream. I'm going to go after it. And I'm going to try to achieve my mission and create my personal legend. And that's really resonated with me because, I practiced law for, about 20 years or so. I have 4 kids and I took some time off. So it was like 30 years since I've really thought about how my in-law story should be a book that can be shared by the world. And it was a dream that I had that it could come to be. I never really thought it would be me who did it. But then I decided one day that it was my personal legend and my mission. Now to use the word, the language that the alchemist has provided, Paul Coelho. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name right. Coelho.
Paulo Coelho, yeah, it's a Brazilian writer, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you. You can pronounce that much better than I do. He's given me some new language to articulate what I chose to do, a number of years ago by leaving my law practice and focusing on researching and writing, and now trying to publicize and get the story out into the world about this particular Holocaust story. Yeah, so I feel like we all have a mission, and in these words, a personal legend to write. And we have to confront our fears and confront our dreams to try to determine what that is and to get there. I don't feel like my life mission is done yet, but I feel like I've achieved a certain level of my life mission that I can be really, really proud of.
I'm wondering what it feels like when we are living our mission, when we are there. Do you have any idea?
Joyful.
Yeah,
that makes sense. It's very joyful. It's really, it's joyful. I mean, there's more to my mission, but I feel like this is one part of my mission. I feel like raising my 4 children was definitely a personal legend and a mission. I feel like this is another chapter of my personal legend. And I feel like there's some more chapters yet to be written, but I think to get there, to be honest, I have to confront some more of my fears and some more of my dreams.
What do you love most about being a woman?
Oh, that's actually easy for me. What I love most about being a woman was, because I'm past my childbearing years, but I'm 59, but was the opportunity to give birth to new life. It's something that you only get to do if you're in the human race anyway, if you're a woman. And it's uniquely mind-blowing. And right now I'm reliving a little bit of that miracle because my oldest daughter, who lives in New York, she's giving birth to twins and in about a month. And so I'm watching her grow 2 lives at once. And it's crazy. It was crazy enough to do one at a time, but there's 2 in there at the same time. And it's the most miraculous thing that we women have the privilege to do.
So I'm wondering if for some of us who choose not to be a mother, to give birth to children, do you think we are missing something?
I think, well, you're missing that, but I think that everybody who makes choices in life misses some other choice that they're not making, right? So by making that choice, I missed a bunch of other things that I didn't do. And I think, yeah, you're missing that because you're not doing it. But I think at the same time, you're making other choices that are really deeply meaningful and fulfilling to your personal legend, to your personal mission. And that's where each person should go. That's what I think. I think that each of us finds the place inside of us where we can find the joy and find the meaning and find the reason for our being alive. And for everyone, that's different. For me, I did have 4 children, but I know lots of women who and men, but we're speaking about women who made the choice to take different path and to write their personal legend in their own way. And that's the right way we should live. That's how it should be.
I love the way you speak about this. Yeah, we all have different missions and gifts, and we do miss that, but it's just part of our journey, right?
Yeah, I promise by having children, you miss a whole ton of stuff.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, my God.
Years of your life are just gone.
Well, it's this beautiful dance, life itself.
You know what? That's a fantastic word to use. It's a dance.
What is the most challenging aspect about being a woman from your perspective?
Challenging aspect of being a woman. I guess that the most challenging aspect of being a woman in my life so far has been really the way that society is structured that doesn't really allow for women who choose to have children in the work world. I'm a lawyer. I was a very successful lawyer, but because I chose to have children, I took a different, I wasn't forced to, but I was kind of the work world forces women who have children into a different reality of what level of success they can find in their careers. And I think even though it's a lot better than it used to be, a lot better, but it's still there. And I felt it, oh my goodness, when I was a very young lawyer, just out of law school, and I was working for a large firm, which I will not name, here in Seattle. I moved back to Seattle here. I was in law school in New York. And I had my first child already. She was born right at the end of law school. And I was at work I was working full time, and there was this assignment that I had, which was to prepare a complaint for one of the attorneys, one of the partners. It wasn't a really super hard assignment, but it was assignment, and they needed it by the morning. They needed to file it in the morning. I got it. I got the assignment, and then I got a call from my daughter's childcare provider. She was at like a childcare center, and they said that your daughter has 103 fever. You have to come pick her up. And I'm like, oh, and my husband is a physician, and he had like, a full slew of patients for the afternoon. So I was like, okay, thank you. So I went to the attorney, and I said, I got the assignment. I'll have it done by the morning when you need it, but I have to go right now and pick up my daughter because she has a fever. And she looked at me like I had just said the worst possible thing I could have ever said. And she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to pick up my daughter. She has 103 fever. And she said, you didn't finish the assignment yet. I said, well, I'll go pick up my daughter. And when my husband comes home from work, I will come back to the office and finish the assignment. It'll be on your chair in the morning. And she thought that I had lost my mind. And so just the attitude, like, and can you imagine though, and this was a woman, can you imagine if instead of that as a response, when I walked in and said this, she said, wow, I'm so sorry to hear your daughter is sick. And of course you should go pick up your daughter. I totally support what you're doing. And you tell me that the complaint will be done on my chair in the morning, and I look forward to seeing it then.
Or even being more flexible, even if you can't get that done because your daughter, then it's okay too, maybe in the afternoon.
Well, they needed to file it. I guess she could have said, you know what, I'll take this off your plate and I'll get someone else to do it. She could have, that would have been more supportive. Yes,
that's true.
But I'm just saying that the work environment, I think for me as a woman in my life to date so far, has been the most challenging aspect of trying to be way too many things at one time, trying to juggle different aspects of being a woman and being a professional and being a really smart, capable human. And we just run up against a lot of obstacles.
Yeah, I hear that over and over again. Yes. And you're saying that this is getting better, right, Karen, now at this time?
It is getting better. I 100% believe it's getting better.
Why did you choose to become a lawyer?
Well, I actually wanted to be a politician. When I was just out of law school, I was a political science major in college, and I was very active in different political things. And I thought, I'm going to be a politician because I can make a difference in the world. I wanted to make a difference in the world. And then, so I went to Washington, D.C., and I started working for a senator. And it was a great job. It was an amazing job. I was a legislative assistant, and I loved it. And after 3 years of doing that, I was like, okay, if I really want to pursue politics, I got to go to law school. So I applied to law school, and I went to law school. And then after my first year, I worked on the senator that I had worked for. I worked on his campaign, his reelection campaign, and I hated it. I hated it. It was just all about raising money. And I was like, this is not going to be my life. I cannot spend my entire life just talking to people, asking them for money for my campaign. So I just said to myself, well, that's okay. I don't have to be a politician because I'm in law school. I could be a lawyer. So I went back to law school and finished my next 2 years. Then I went to work for a law firm and tried to figure out where I fit into the legal structure of private law practice, and jumped around a little bit, but ended up for most of my career doing elder law and working with clients who are older and their families. And it was very, very rewarding to help people in those situations to get the help that they need to live a secure and safe and happy life.
What is the meaning of freedom to you, Karen? What is to be free?
Ooh, that's a tough question in today's world.
Yeah.
Because so many people are not free, depending, of course, on how you define it.
Right.
There's political freedom and there's spiritual freedom. You don't have to, you could have one without the other. I know that for certain. If you look at what happened in the Holocaust, Jews did not have any kind of political freedom, zero. But many of the memoirs I read many memoirs, of course, during the course of my research. And what was astounding was the spiritual freedom that these people were able to maintain, because they went inside themselves and said, my body is not free. Let's say I'm in a concentration camp or I'm living in a ghetto, but my spirit is free. They can't take away my humanity. They can take my life. They can take food away from me, but they cannot take my spiritual freedom from me. And that's something that each of us it's really hard if you're in a situation where you're imprisoned. Or if you look at Jewish people who were in the Soviet Union and were imprisoned in the Soviet Union, we called them refuseniks in the late 70s and 80s. They were people who were imprisoned in the Soviet Union for practicing their Judaism and studying and teaching Hebrew, like Natan Sharansky, who's now, lives in Israel. He talks about retaining his spiritual freedom, even though he was in jail for years and years and years. And he said, they can put me in this prison, but they cannot take my spirit. So that's spiritual freedom that I think is meaningful to all of us. And it's harder to do if you live in a place which doesn't grant political freedom. I agree with that. I feel that deeply. But if you're lucky enough to live in a place that grants political freedom, then what it means to be free is to exercise your ability to practice both your political freedom and your spiritual freedom and try to bring them into some kind of whole. And if you can take your spiritual freedom and activate it into doing something out in the world, if you have the freedom to do so, to make your spiritual freedom a reality and to help others to come into that and also have freedom, that's true freedom.
At this time, what do you think is the world's greatest need?
Well, we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's easy to just say to get rid of the coronavirus.
True.
But that's a short-term desire. This will go away. I don't know how long it will be. None of us, of course, know how long it will be. But I think what the world really needs is, again, it's a cliche, but I'll explain what I mean by my cliche of peace. But by peace, the only way to achieve peace, in my opinion, is if people find within themselves. We talked before about how people have both the good and the bad within them as humans. Peace will only come when enough humans, it's kind of like, we all have this new vocabulary because of the pandemic, but like the herd immunity, we're going to get peace when we get herd immunity to people, suppressing the evil side of themselves and letting the good side of themselves be the dominant force. When people can find the goodness in their souls and in their brains and in their hearts to show kindness to each other instead of looking at each other as the other, looking at others, other nations, other peoples, other races as people who are less than, as people who don't deserve something that I deserve, as something like that, then we'll be able to achieve peace through humanity all over the world.
What is your understanding of the word love?
I think love is one of those words that, just depending on what color glasses you're wearing that day, it's too cliche. Like it's too cliche even for me to have used it as like the thing to try to strive for, because people use the word love to mean so many different things. And there's so many different kinds of love that are in the world that you can articulate. And so for me, it's not a word that I use a lot because it's too nebulous. But for me, I think love in a personal sense, love is the feeling that I have for my family, for the people who are very close to me, with whom I have special bonds. And also I recognize I'm an observant Jewish person, and I've studied the Bible my whole life, the Hebrew Bible. And of course, everybody knows the addict in the Bible, which you should love your neighbor as yourself. And the word love is used there. In Hebrew, it's ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You should love. Ohev, ahav is the Hebrew word for love. And you should love your neighbor, your friend. Reacha can mean both neighbor and friend. Kamocha, like yourself. And there's thousands of years of commentaries about what does that mean to love someone else as yourself. And I think if we can look at that phrase and think about what the Bible is teaching us about love, that it's something that you should extend to others, really what you would want others to give back to you. It's a little bit of a different way of saying the same thing, which I think is also a very common concept, do to others like you'd want them to do to you. But I think when it specifically comes to love, it gives us an insight as to what at least the Hebrew Bible believes love is, which is how you act, how you treat others, how you behave in the world. Because if you behave towards others like you want them to behave to you, that will create love. That will lead the feelings of love to come between you and another person. That's a biblical conscript, which is to live in a world where people treat each other with kindness, especially the most vulnerable. How many times does it say in the Hebrew Bible to treat people who are, to use biblical language, it's not modern, but to, the orphan and the widow and the stranger, to treat them with the greatest kindness that you can find. It means the oppressed. It means those that don't have, the haves and the have-nots. These are the have-nots in those days, in biblical times. I think it's teaching us how to express love. Maybe not what love is, but how to try to create it and express it.
Now I wanted you to talk to us a bit more about the inspiration and intention of writing your book, My Soul is Filled with Joy.
Well, my original intention was certainly to document my in-law, Sam and Esther Goldberg, their story of what happened to them. That was my original intention, but it not completely, because I did tell their story, but it changed for me personally. It changed and it bloomed and blossomed into their story really becoming my story. So the book ended up becoming really two parts. There's part one, which is Sam and Esther's story. And I start from before the war, because I want to give some background to what their lives were like before their whole world was upended in World War II. But then I take the reader through their lives until they meet each other. And then as they go on together through life, and I end their part of the story when they emigrate to America in 1949. And that's where I stop it. But then the second part of the story is my story, and the story of my deciding to write this book, which is a crazy thing. Like, I'm writing a book about my in-laws' experience, and it's not my blood family. It's a family that I married into, and kind of how that came to be. And then all the things, the miraculous and amazing experiences that I had as I was on this journey that changed my life forever. So really became such a big part of my life that that's really what happened. My intention was to write their story, but for me personally, it became so much more and so much bigger than that. And that's.
Talk to me for a moment a bit more about that, Karen. How did your life change? In what ways?
The biggest way, honestly, is, just a tiny bit of background about me. I grew up here in Seattle, lived a really lovely childhood here with two wonderful, loving parents, two brothers, grandparents, and cousins, and just lived a regular, comfortable middle-class life. And my father was an attorney. So we just lived here, and I had a very privileged, lovely childhood. I went to private college at Barnard College. And then I went and worked for a senator, and then I went to law school. Like my life's just been lovely, really, absolutely lovely. What I realized, I'll tell you when it happened, because it was actually a moment in time. So my in-laws, like I mentioned before, my father-in-law was a prisoner in the death camp Treblinka from June of 1942 until August of 1943. So 13 months. Most people that came to Treblinka came off the train, and they were dead in 90 minutes. And he survived for 13 months. So it's remarkable, his survival there. My mother-in-law, in the meantime, they didn't know each other at this time. There was a roundup in her town, which is not very far from Treblinka, maybe like 15 miles away. But there was a roundup of all the Jews in the town, and she hid in an attic to escape. And she survived the roundup. She came out after the town was all gone, basically, and quiet. And she ran out into the forest, and she tried to find some people who would help her, some non-Jewish families that might give her some food or a place to hide. And she was turned away over and over again. But then finally, this one house that she knocked on the door, the Stish family, she said, "Can you help me? I'm starving, haven't eaten in 3 days, and I need to hide." And they said, "Yes, we will help you." And she hid in and around the Stish family farms. There were two families that lived next door to each other. And she was hiding there for a year when some of the prisoners at the Treblinka death camp, which was just, like I said, 10, 15 miles away, made an uprising. And my father-in-law was part of the planning and execution of that uprising. And they blew up the camp, and they all tried to run away. There were about 800 prisoners who were the workforce of the camp, 800 Jews who they kept as prisoners there. And so he started running. My father-in-law ran out of the camp, and he ran and he ran and he ran. And he ended up in this forest. This area was totally wooded of trees. And that's the area that my mother-in-law had been hiding in. And that's where they met. She saw him. They knew right away that each other were Jewish people. They started speaking in Yiddish, which was their native language. The Jews of Poland, almost all of them spoke Yiddish. And he said, I just escaped from Treblinka. Can you help me? I need to hide. They're chasing the Nazis, and the Ukrainians are not far behind. We need to hide. And she's like, she couldn't believe it. Somebody escaped from Treblinka. But she said, okay, come with me. And she took him to who she called her angels, the Stish families. And they knocked on the door there and said, this man just escaped from Treblinka. You have to hide us. They're out chasing after all the Jews who escaped. And this woman, rightly so, looked at her, Helena, and she said, you're crazy. You're nuts. I can't hide you. If they find you hiding in my barn, they're going to kill you guys for sure. And they're going to kill me and all my children. And that was absolutely true. But somehow Esther convinced her to hide in the barn, allow them to hide in the barn. So they hid in the barn for like 3 days until the big search kind of calmed down. And then they came out, and Sam decided to stay and hide with Esther because he had nowhere to go anyway. He knew that his family was dead already, so he didn't have anywhere to go. Esther knew her whole family was already murdered. So they hid together, and they went out deeper into the forest, and they dug a pit, and they lived in that pit. If you want to call it living, they lived in that pit for almost a whole year. They covered it with wooden planks and brush from the forest floor, so it would be like camouflaged. And the Stish family brought them food almost every day, every day that it was safe to bring food, they brought them food and kind of left it there, and they would get it after dark. They would only come out usually after dark. And then they were liberated by the Soviet army that came through Poland in the summer of 1944. So they lived in that pit for about a year. And when we went and visited, so I was able to locate the surviving children of these Stish families through my research. And my whole family went and visited them. And they said to us as we were talking, when we're done talking here, if you want, we'll take you out to the forest and show you the pit that your parents lived in. And we were like, what? How is it possible that the pit from 75 years ago is still there? And they said, oh, it's still there. So they showed us the pit. They walked us out into the forest and showed us. I was there with my husband and our 4 kids and 1 son-in-law. And they showed us, it's deteriorated. It's eroded, it's full of leaves, but it's definitely a pit. And it was when I was staring into that pit that I changed forever. And I realized that I have taken my life for granted, and what I have, the easy life that I have lived, for granted. I knew that when I would go back home to Seattle, I'd go to my nice house with a refrigerator full of food and a closet full of clothes. And my in-laws had nothing like that. They lived here in this dirt. And that was the moment where I decided to live my life more aware of the goodness and more full of trying to live with more gratitude, really, is really the way to put it. So that's a long answer with a build up to your question. But there were other things that really fundamentally changed about me, but that's the biggest one.
So gratitude, yeah, that's the word. But the story is amazing. I don't believe anything just randomly happens. So everything happens for a reason. Life is teaching us to become more loving and manifest more love here in this world. So I think, you're one of these agents, change agents. So you're being called to help with the mission to make this place a more peaceful place. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
I have a few more questions for you. Before I ask those questions, would you like to add anything or read a passage in your book?
Oh, well, read a passage in my book. I could grab my book. Yeah. There's one passage that I could read that I would love to read, actually.
Yeah.
It's not too long. I wrote this piece. It's on page 231 of the book. And I wrote it after my trip to Poland. Here's what I wrote. The Poland trip was a roller coaster ride, from the horror of Majdanek to the joy of finding the Goldberg farm in Bagatella, from the darkness of Treblinka to the goodness of the Stish family, from the disgust of Auschwitz and Birkenau to the promise of the Poles reconnecting with their Judaism. The entire time, Sam and Esther hovered, whispering in my ear that they knew the truth, that humans have the capacity for the greatest evil, to torture and kill, to shoot people into a pit, to gas them to death, to burn their bodies and extract the gold from their teeth, to hunt them down in the forest for a kilo of sugar. But there was another truth that they also knew, that humans had the highest capacity for kindness, to give a fellow prisoner a cube of sugar, to hide and feed people as they're being hunted like animals, to cook food in a washpot at Treblinka and bring it to the dying in the hospital, to stand up for someone else, even in a death camp, to save others when it puts your own children in danger. I opened up to the holding of these contradictory thoughts in my mind at the same time, and living with the tension that it creates. Before this trip, I knew that I would discover new facts and meet new people, but what I didn't know was that I would reach the dark matter of the human soul. I now accept that humans are at once both evil and good. My work on Sam and Esther's story and my visit to Poland taught me that I can choose which side of my nature to express. This is my new reality.
How do you define success these days? What is to be successful to you?
That's so funny because I just, even before COVID, but it like really happened when COVID started, the whole pandemic and staying home and everything. And I started my own little podcast. It's a 60-second daily like podcast, and I call it Gratitude in a Minute. I just wrote a podcast. I just recorded one last week about the idea of redefining success. Because I think that this pandemic has taught us that we really need to redefine what does it mean to be successful. And because if you say success is like the pre-pandemic sort of way we lived, you're just never going to be successful. It's just not the same. And like for me, I was going around talking about my book and, doing all kinds of, I was doing research in libraries and all these things that I just am not able to do right now. And so that can't be the way I'm defining success. And so I had to redefine success, and I did it in a very small way. Now, of course, I'm working on another book, which is really about my family, which is a totally different story. It's an American story, and the research is super fun instead of super horrific. But right. One of my daughter, who's pregnant, who I mentioned before, she was visiting for a couple of weeks, and she taught me how to make sourdough bread. And I know it's a whole craze in COVID. Everyone's doing sourdough bread. But I'd never done it before. And she showed me how, and she showed me that it's not hard. It's just particular. Mm-hmm. And we made the most delicious sourdough bread for our Shabbat dinner that we had one Shabbat that she was here. Shabbat is the Jewish Sabbath. We celebrate it Friday night to Saturday night. And I said to her, we have redefined success. We looked at it. So in a sense, I have redefined success for myself because especially the first couple of months, I found it really hard to be creative in my writing. And so I'm redefining success in terms of what I'm achieving right now. And I'm trying to be kind to myself because we're in a time that's not normal. But success in general, though, beyond the COVID craziness that we're in, really is to do something that I'll speak personally, to do something that I am personally satisfied with, that I have done something as well as I can do it, that I've achieved a goal that I set out for myself to achieve, even if it's small. Like, it's okay that it's a small success. Success doesn't have to be, I don't know, like you don't have to be Bill Gates to consider yourself a success. You can be Karen Treiger and consider the fact that I decided to write a book and I actually wrote it and published it. That's a success. And so I think COVID is making us rethink what does it mean to be successful and what is success. But I do think that success still stems from your inner soul and what do you want to achieve? And then if you can achieve that, you are successful.
I love the way you said about being kind to yourself. So that's part of the success journey, being kind to oneself. Right. 2 more questions. If you knew you would die soon, meaning leaving the body, would you make any change in your life or do anything differently?
I don't think so. I think I would want to try to get all of my kids near me and enjoy that part of my life for whatever I had left. But I think that the person that I have worked hard to become is the person that I'll be on my way out with, because that's the person that I'll be comfortable living in the next life, whatever the next life means. I believe that we leave our bodies, but we're not gone. I don't know. There's no way to know till we get there. But I do believe in some form of spiritual life after our bodies have left the world, have died. And so I feel like the person that I am is going to be a nice person in the next world. I'm going to do okay there. So yeah, because I think that my efforts to bring the kindness, to be the person who extends the hand, to be the person who helps, to be the person who tries to say the nice thing to someone instead of the nasty thing to someone. I mean, how many times have you been somewhere and someone says something so nasty and you're like, wow, you did not need to say that. I mean, I'm also not the kind of person who would say you did not need to say that, because that's also nasty.
Right. True.
But I might be the kind of person, or at least I hope I'm the kind of person that might take that person aside and say, I'm really sorry that happened to you. That's not who you are. And I know that. I might, extend a kind word to that person later. I guess the person that I hope that I am, and that I hope that I'm continuing to strive to be, if I had a couple more months, I would continue to be that person and feel like wherever I'm going, I have a good base.
Yeah, I don't believe in life after death. There's life after life in a way. I love the way you said that too. You said, we leave the body, but we are not gone. That resonates, Karen. That's very spiritual. What are 3 things about life you know for sure as of now?
3 things I know about life for sure as of now. I know that we're all going to die. Our bodies will die. I know that for sure. I know that this is something else that I learned more deeply through the book. And we touched on it earlier, but it fits into the response to your question, which is that I'm sure that we can choose how we're behaving while we're here. We can choose what part of our humanity we are going to express. And that's something that I'm more sure of now than I've ever been. One more thing that I'm sure of, which is if you don't try, you'll never do it.
I have one final question, but this is a technical one. Where can we find more information about you, your books, products, services, and future projects?
Well, I have a website. It's KarenTreiger.com. So it's my name. On my website, it has information about the podcast that I'm doing, Gratitude in a Minute, and it has information about the book, My Soul is Filled with Joy. You can buy that on Amazon, of course. But there's a link on my website to purchase the book if you want to. And I haven't really updated it much because COVID is, gone bananas, but I do have a list of all the places that I've spoken so far, and then, the places that were, I guess, put on hold. But I have my schedule there, and I also have a way to contact me there. And I think that when I speak to audiences, my audiences leave very inspired because of the story is very powerful. As you only heard just a tiny bit of it, but it's really very powerful. But the reason it's powerful is because it leads to the lessons about gratitude, about choice, about looking into your own family. Like, we all have families and everybody has a story. I chose to look into this story, but everybody has a story and it'll blow your mind really if you just dig a little bit. So those are some of the messages that I try to leave people with, both from the book itself and then also when I speak to people. Those are some of the things that resonate deeply, I think, with people. I do a lot of speaking with schools. I'm a speaker at our Washington State Holocaust Center, and they send the speakers all around to different public schools around the state. And so, not during COVID, but generally I do that quite a bit around the state. And I find that very meaningful and powerful as well. So, and I have done a few by Zoom. So if you live in a place where you have a school or a group, a synagogue, a church, a group of people that want to read the book and have a book, have me come virtually to your book club. I've done that lots of times. So I'm very open to talking about these issues and presenting different parts of it with people as much as possible. I wrote the book to get the story out there. So whatever aspects and ways I can do that, I'm eager to do so. But most of my information you can find on my website. And the Gratitude in a Minute podcast can be found on Alexa or any whatever podcast deliverer you use. You can just put in Gratitude in a Minute, Karen Treiger, you'll find it. It's a 60-second daily podcast.
Thank you so much again, Karen. And I'll have the links down below in the written form too, so it will be easily accessed. Thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Karen Treiger and her work, please visit KarenTreiger.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. I want to thank the Patreon members, Lawrence McGrath, Mark Basden, Terry Clayton, and Aidan Vickrock. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.